All right. I had forgotten to start recording. I'm officially recording right now. Gordon, thanks for your question. I, again, am Michelle Lefebvre. I'm one of the facilitators for Nutrition and Healthy Living Certificate. There's actually now currently 9 facilitators. This is a very popular eCornell course. But all of us are registered dietitians. And most of us come from a very different background. We have very different areas of expertise and interests. My area of expertise and interest has been mostly in food service and culinary and consequently food allergies. I spent the last, well, I guess until last summer, I was working for Cornell Dining as their registered dietitian and leading all of their recipe development and any of their food allergy efforts, meaning food allergy training and food allergen identification on our labels. Since then, I have been teaching. I teach live nutrition classes for Purdue University Northwest, which is a small satellite campus for Purdue University, just south of Chicago. So I live in Chicago. Yeah, so my specialty has been food allergies. I actually was doing a lot of work in food allergies prior to even working with Cornell. I actually ran a personal chef business for about 9 years and mostly helped people, clients, customers, families that had special needs. So they would have very special diets and I would cook their meals for them or do grocery shopping for them or do cooking classes. There's a wide array of things that I did. And I will tell you that gluten and celiac disease and food allergies was definitely not nearly as talked about as it is now. And that was only 15 years ago. So the whole landscape on food allergies and celiac disease has changed tremendously. So it looks like I'm not recognizing a lot of people's names. So it looks like maybe some of you have just joined the certificate or working on the first one. The facilitators move through the different courses and facilitate. So I'll probably see you at some point throughout your time in the 6 different courses. Usually every time you have a course, you'll have a different office hours with a different facilitator. So we offer them once per course, or I'm sorry, twice per course. I had an office hours last week and it was mostly question and answer. This week it will be, I will explore a topic on, again, because my interest, I talk about food allergies, but the other facilitators will talk about some other topics. So you'll explore different topics throughout the certificate during your office hours. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go into, I have a slide deck, short one. I usually talk for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then I can answer some questions about food allergies or other questions about the course. Gordon was asking about fiber. You guys can ask content questions, nutrition related content questions, or you could also talk about, if you have any questions about like just how to manage Canvas or specific questions and how to answer the discussions and so forth. With that, any questions before I launch into the slide deck?
I have a question. This is Lisa Marie. So my niece has celiac, so I've been able to learn a lot that way. We don't have history in our family that we know of, but who knows, right? And we felt bad because she went through her first years of life always having a stomach ache and never liking sandwiches or pizza like any other kid, and then finally figured that out, right? Mm-hmm. So we all feel a little bit bad that didn't pursue that earlier, but there are tests to run that, but what about like other allergies? You see all these things online about you can submit, drops of blood or What do you think about the diagnosis process for allergies, and are those types of sensitivities? I hear mixed bag of yes, it's worth it, and no, that's total bunk. So before we get into like how we do it, how do you discover if you have those things?
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. And I probably won't cover too much about food sensitivities, but we'll focus more on what's diagnosable, right?
Got it.
Which is, the anaphylactic food allergies and celiac disease, as well as gluten intolerant or gluten sensitivity, which just became diagnosable in 2013. So I focus on the diagnosable, i.e., there are diagnosis codes out there. Your doctor can diagnose you with any of these. Those are the ones I focus on. But the reality is there are many foods out there that are considered food sensitivities, and they go beyond, well beyond what I'll cover today.
Mm-hmm.
And there's many associations, whether it's a positive or negative association with just eating it based on you said pizza. Gosh, somebody might have had a negative association with it.
Mm-hmm.
There are sulfite sensitivities. There are I've worked with garlic and onion, like allium sensitivities. I've worked with tons of different sensitivities, but oftentimes they're very, very difficult to diagnose. And
Mm-hmm.
an allergist will either do a scratch test,
Yeah.
which I've always been a little bit wary about, because somebody will come back and say, "Oh, we're allergic to all these foods," and when it comes down to it, they're not. Like, I had somebody that, I mean, I've worked with thousands of students at Cornell with food allergies, and I've had people come to me and say, "I can't have parsley on anything. We're allergic." And I'm like, "Okay, allergic like anaphylactic? Oh, no, 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 not allergic anaphylactic. Well, okay, so let's be more specific, right?" So really getting down to, well, it's just a sensitivity that came back on this test that you mailed away, like you just said, Lisa Marie, right? So a lot of times those tests are picking up foods that have been in the diet a lot in the past 2 weeks. And
Mm.
so if somebody happens to be eating a ton of eggs, for example, for some odd reason, or a ton of dairy, they went away for the weekend. I had somebody that traveled to Europe in France and was eating a ton of cheese, and again came back and well, yeah, she came out that she had a dairy sensitivity, but she gave it 3 weeks or 3 months, and it seemed to even out. So that's why I really emphasize, and I think it's a great question to lead in. That's why I really emphasize what I'm talking about today is diagnosable.
Okay.
And the food sensitivities are a little bit more, I would call them squishy.
I was gonna say fuzzy. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's fuzzy, but
Yeah.
maybe I can explore a little bit more. Let me go into, I'm going to share my screen, guys.
Okay. Thank you.
And of course, and what I'll do is there we go. What I'll do is kind of elaborate a little bit as maybe something comes up. So just to give you guys a little bit of background in terms of food allergies and food intolerances. Again, I'm talking about things that you can go to the doctor and get diagnosed. So just as a review, okay, some of you may or may not have gone through some of the further courses, but proteins in the body, one of their jobs is to defend the body against disease, okay? And so a disease is known as an antigen, which is basically a foreign body that elicits some kind of reaction. Now, we could say that coronavirus 19 is an antigen, something that comes into the body and the body starts to try to react. Some kind of virus, right? Enters, you could call it smallpox, influenza, measles. They enter in and cause some kind of sickness. And really, they want to multiply. They want to get strong, okay? And they continue to invade more cells. That is what's known as an antigen. oops, sorry, my mouse is pretty sensitive. Okay, so your body creates something known as an antibody. And an antibody are giant protein molecules that basically invade the antigens. They are meant to fight those antigens, and they're made from proteins. Okay, there are hundreds of different ways that your body uses proteins, and this is one of them. But once antibodies are created one time, the body remembers it's not supposed to be hot. It remembers not how, it's supposed to be how to make them, and can create them much quicker. This is known as immunity. This is why we're working on a vaccine across the world, right? So it puts a little amount of antigen into your body. Your body can then identify it as a antigen and create an antibody or a defense mechanism to fight it. Does that all make sense? Yeah. So really, this is immunity, and it's a wonderful time because so many of us are thinking about or hearing about vaccines. Well, then here's the thing: food allergy is an immunological response to the food. The antigen is actually the food. And this is why food allergies are so challenging, because we can't just stop eating food, right? And in most cases, in food allergies, you have to stop eating the specific food that you become food allergic to. So fractions of the food are absorbed into the blood and elicit some kind of immunological response. And the reaction is almost generally immediate, most often is immediate, especially over time. So if somebody has a food allergy, maybe the first time it takes a little bit of time to have a reaction, but as time goes by, every time they're exposed to that food, the reaction becomes usually comes much more quicker. So in terms of finding, sort of diagnosing what a food allergy is, most people would eat a food and have some kind of reaction, right? So you have the antibodies trying to fight off the food. And if a doctor is trying to diagnose, it will often do a food challenge because they want to test and get a full reaction to get the full diagnosis. And for a lot of people, this ends up being very scary because, and we'll talk about symptoms in the next slide, because all of a sudden it's like, wait, you're gonna put me into a food allergy reaction? Well, that's the way to fully get a diagnosis. So there's a lot of people, especially going back to your question, Lucy Marie, there's a lot of people out there that believe they have a food allergy and they don't necessarily have it hasn't been diagnosed yet.
Mm-hmm.
So for many reasons. I mean, a lot of times they'll have a food allergy reaction, they'll go to the hospital, they'll get some medicines, and then they'll leave the next day, follow up with an allergist, and they don't follow up because they haven't had a reaction again. But in a true food allergy, it's something that shows up again and again when you are exposed to the food. So the treatment is full avoidance of that particular food. There is an emerging research that treats food allergies, and this is known as oral immunotherapy. There's probably less than 20,000 people that are doing it in this country. I mean, it's that new, but it basically exposes the person again and again to very small amounts of the allergen in hopes that they build up enough immunity to the antigen.
So like a vaccine almost.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
And it can have oftentimes similar symptoms, just much more mild, right? So if if the said allergy causes somebody to really lose their breath and get short of breath, and they getting the treatment, and oftentimes it's 3 times a week for over 1 to 2 years. I mean, it's a pretty
Wow.
intense, yeah, pretty intense commitment. And a lot of times, they don't recommend that you play any sports during those 2 years, and you might have asthmatic symptoms or shortness of breath and the day after your immunotherapy. But that's a new research on the horizon. So I had mentioned that I was going to talk about symptoms. These are your standard symptoms for a food allergy. And this is for a food allergy. I'm going to show you what foods. But, I've taught food allergies mostly to chefs and people in food service. So I always start with the more shocking information at the beginning. And the most shocking is, wow, this can affect this many organs. Yeah, I mean, somebody might feel it initially like, ooh, something's kind of itching my tongue, or my tongue starts to swell, to get swollen. So that's oftentimes sort of a first. It hurts their throat, tightening of the throat, difficulty swallowing. They become hoarse. They then become short of breath. They might be wheezing or coughing. A lot of times it'll hit their gut, but not always. And I liken it to your body's reacting, trying to get the antigen or the food out of the body. But that doesn't happen, I would say, in the number of people that I've worked with. It's actually not very often that they'll get some kind of abdominal pain or nausea or vomiting. There is a lot of anxiety, especially initially when they get diagnosed, about eating in general, but then once they start feeling the reaction, like how bad is it going to be, they get very nervous. There's almost a sense of panic. Eyes might be swollen. Skin, they might get some hives, might get itchy, might get red, and then finally chest pain, low blood pressure. So people might faint, they get a weak pulse, they go into shock. But finally, what the ones that are marked with a little asterisk are the immediate and potential life-threatening symptoms. So the thing that's most scary, especially for parents and teachers, is anaphylaxis. And anaphylaxis is true loss of consciousness, along with the challenging to swallow and breathe. And so, the anaphylaxis is what sort of puts most food allergies on the charts in terms of making it a very scary kind of issue. Now, having come from a food service background, any chef or wait staff or somebody working in food service, they really are super aware of situations like that. So if a guest comes in, they are put on high alert that, okay, there's potential for somebody to be anaphylaxis to certain foods. Now, in terms of food allergies, about 32 million Americans have food allergies, and that's 1 in 10 adults and 1 in 13 children. 1 in 13 children just went up from 11 only 2 years ago. So more than half of adults with food allergies have experienced some kind of severe reaction. Maybe you guys have known somebody that has experienced a severe reaction, and more than 40% of children have experienced a severe reaction. Now, I'm going to tell you, I worked with a manager when I worked at Cornell, and both of his kids had severe food allergies. His daughter had peanuts and tree nuts, and his son had, I think, everything else. I know it was egg, dairy, soy, and I think shellfish. But his daughter, she was in 2nd grade. She was in they had a peanut-free classroom. They had a peanut-free table that she could sit at for, during lunch in the cafeteria. And do you know that her teacher came in one day, came into the classroom after lunch one day and started passing out papers. And she started having reactions. She started getting really itchy, and then her hands started to swell, and she started to go into a pretty major food allergy reaction. She hadn't eaten the food. Well, the teacher had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for lunch and forgot to wash his hands. So, this, in severe cases, and this says severe reactions, it's hard to say what a severe is. Usually severe means it's sending you to the hospital. But in severe cases, as the antigen becomes almost stronger, right? It's your body is reacting even stronger to it, then the reactions can become, like I said, they can come quicker, and the reactions can be quite a bit stronger. So even in the case of not eating the food. So what are all these great food allergies? Here they are. So I have the big 8 here. We are slowly, FDA is now adding a 9th, but until it officially gets added, we'll keep it at the big 8. Notice these are all proteins. They're all protein-based foods. And the FDA calls them or refers them to the big 8 because these are the big 8 that are required to be on a food label. So your peanuts, which is sort of the one that most people think about. Egg is probably the one that is most prevalent in kids and is most associated with asthma. There's milk and dairy. Fish, as in fin fish, but there's also shellfish. There's wheat, which is different than gluten and different than celiac, okay? So there's an actual wheat allergy, meaning people get anaphylactic to eating wheat. There's a soy allergy and a tree nut allergy. The number 9 that has just, literally in the last month and a half has been, it was approved by the House. It's now moved up to the Senate to add sesame as a number 9. But the big 8 account for 90% of all food allergies, true anaphylactic food allergies. So that is why they are required to be on the any food label.
Sorry, I got Lisa Marie with another question. Okay. The last slide before talked about the epidemic, and you've mentioned before, celiac wasn't even something we talked about. And what do we see about is it one of these things about increased prevalence, or is it increased awareness? What do you?
Well, this is food allergies only.
Okay. But as we call it an epidemic, right? Do we think it's on the rise, or is it we're just more aware of it?
No, it's completely on the rise.
Okay.
Absolutely. So if you see in the bottom, 377% claim lines with diagnoses of anaphylactic food reactions increased 377% between 2007 and 2016.
Are you going to talk about why?
So basically what I believe what a big part of that has to do with is there are more diagnoses, right? So
right.
A lot of it has to do with the general awareness wasn't there, and now more and more people are getting actual diagnoses, which means we can report on this. This comes from Northwestern University. There's a huge food allergy research organization as part of Northwestern that's funded by the Asthma and Allergy, National Asthma and Allergy Institute. It's like 6 words, I forget specifically, but it's a nationally funded center as part of Northwestern that focuses specifically on asthma and allergies. So somebody else asked a question.
I think she's said, are we going to talk about why? So you mentioned because, we're actually getting diagnoses, people, know what it is. Do we think something's actually shifting in the overall sphere of our diet or the quality of food we're eating to have it go up as well, not just incidence rate, I guess, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, I think those are good questions, and I don't like to project anything until there's
Sure.
a lot of crap approved research out there. But I will say that there's been a huge connection again coming out of Northwestern around gut health, specifically gut health before the age of 2 for children up to the age of 2, that there's development of microbiome that's completely connected to food allergy incidence. And in fact, there's some research out there that suggests that people that live with animals have a reduced amount of food allergy incidence. People that live in the country have a reduced amount of food allergy. So basically, I mean, there's a book out there. I did not know it. I actually saw the author of the book, Let Them Eat Dirt. She was talking about another book I was researching actually just yesterday on nutrition and health. So, the theory around, building up that gut, your own microbiome early, there's connection with C-section babies and increased food allergy incidence. So there's a lot of, it's brewing. There's a lot more research now connecting very specific, mostly around gut health and even gut health of the mom. So, now there's whole groups of people that are like asking for birth canal, parts of the birth canal so that they can just, let's just say there's groups of people that are trying to increase their microbiome even when they've gone through a C-section for their baby. So that's a better way of putting it. So there are lots of connections. There's research out there, but I would say it's early research.
So we've got some correlations, but no definitive causations for our environment, or even, like you just mentioned, country versus maybe an urban setting and what you're missing out on. So
I believe, we'll see what happens after this big shift in, everybody's using hand sanitizer right now, but, are people eating less? It's really tracking trends over a large period of time.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So,
all right. Thank you.
So, no, this is a great question. I'm glad you brought it up. So we talked about food allergies, right? Diagnosable food allergies. Then there are food intolerances. And food intolerances are different than a food allergy because the immune system is not involved. You're not reacting to an antigen. Now, in a food intolerance, reactions can also occur quickly. Oftentimes, they're not occurring as immediate as a food allergy, but they can occur quickly. But oftentimes, they could be a little bit more, they could take a little bit more time to develop. And it makes it challenging because you're not quite sure what of the food caused the reaction, because it could be up to 24 hours after you ingest the food. Then it's like, well, what did I eat? Was it the last meal, or was it 16 or 18 hours ago? There's a huge range of symptoms for food intolerances, and symptoms often change. And they're very frequently related to digestion. So oftentimes they're abdominal pain, diarrhea, constipation. The types of foods people are intolerant to is very abundant. They oftentimes can outgrow a food intolerance. You don't necessarily see somebody outgrow a food allergy, although it does happen. Egg is usually the one that people will outgrow most often, especially infants will have an anaphylactic egg allergy and they'll outgrow it. But in terms of a food intolerance, that can change. And so the 4 primary food intolerances are gluten, lactose, there's some food additives, things like sulfites, and then there's fruits and vegetables. And I am, because of time, but also, I mean, I could spend an entire hour talking about a food intolerance to fruits and vegetables. There's a whole set of I mean, that takes us into a whole other topic. And that topic is called FODMAPs. And FODMAPs are fructooligosaccharides. I always get this fructooligosaccharides, maltose, and polysaccharides. And so it's your saccharides. I think, is anyone in the carbohydrate course? You guys are learning about saccharides. There are people that have quite a challenging time in digesting saccharides. And so that can be an entire course, but if you're interested, I would Google FODMAPs and you'll find a ton of information. People are sensitive to fructose. You learn more about the saccharide fructose, and it's the 602 course. People are sensitive to brassicas or the cruciferous family of vegetables. So, and then they're sensitive to pollens on fruits and vegetables too. So that could be an entire course. And I'll talk a little bit more about gluten, but lactose is a food intolerance to the lactose found in milk and dairy products. And basically the body has a reduced enzyme called lactase. Lactase is an enzyme that breaks down lactose. And so if it gets to lactose gets to the good old large intestine without being broken down, and in the small intestine, yeah, it causes a lot of generally gas, pain, and bowel movement disturbances. But that's in the case of reduced lactase in the body. Again, probably could spend an entire session talking about lactose intolerance, but I know Dr. Levitsky talks about it, so I don't spend a ton of time on it. I will mention there is something known as oral food syndrome, and I don't think I've ever taught a course that somebody hasn't been like, oh yeah, that is me. Oral food syndrome is being sensitive to the pollen that's found on fruits and vegetables, and they're associated with specific plant pollen, right? So there is the birch pollens, which is in the early spring, tend to be found on apples, cherries, peaches, pears, and plums. The summer pollens are found on grasses. People are sensitive to cantaloupes, mostly melons, and sometimes I've seen them sensitive to tomatoes, but less often. The fall are the ragweed, so they're more sensitive to the melons as well, and then peaches tend to come in the fall as well. So this is oral food syndrome, is getting those symptoms mostly in the mouth, itchy, kind of tickly, may get a scratchy throat, but that's where it ends. There's no anaphylaxis generally involved. I have had some people that have very severe oral food syndrome, but anyone with oral food syndrome can generally eat the fruit or vegetable cooked. So if you can't eat an apple, but you can eat applesauce because the pollen is no longer available. Okay, so I don't talk a lot about celiac other than it's a food intolerance because Dr. Levitsky covers it. But if you guys have specific questions about it, I'm happy to talk to you guys about that or something else.
Can I ask a question about it?
Yeah, of course.
So you mentioned at the beginning that gluten intolerance can now be diagnosed. There's a new test issued in 2013. I was wondering if you could speak to that a bit, because in the course it says that there is no way to diagnose it yet.
Yeah, so there's not a test for it. It's just diagnosable, right? So typically it's diagnosed by sheer avoidance, and the doctor says you have gluten sensitivity. So it's still, as Lisa Marie had asked earlier about diagnosing, it's still on a little bit of squishy side. But if somebody, you're working with your doctor and the doctor says, you've been complaining of digestive issues for quite some time. You've got some joint pain, you've had some migraines. I mean, the symptoms are huge. There's a huge list of symptoms that go along with gluten sensitivity. Why don't you avoid gluten and let's see what happens? And so person goes out, they avoid gluten, and they come back 6 weeks later and like, wow, doc, I feel so much better. And then they get the code. So it's really that. In terms of celiac disease has biomarkers that can be tracked within the blood, as well as usually a biopsy is performed. So the people with gluten sensitivity do not show generally don't show anything in the bloodstream, and don't require a biopsy. So it contains a diagnosis because it makes it easier for people. There's no cure. It's not something that you take a medication for. The same thing with celiac disease. You don't take any medication for it. You just avoid gluten. But with gluten sensitivity, generally people are a little bit less severe. Not always. I've worked with a ton of students that are asymptomatic with celiac disease, meaning completely like no symptoms at all. So I have a student she's a Cornell alum. She and I worked so very closely together. She introduced herself to me as a freshman, and she got diagnosed the year prior and she was completely asymptomatic, and then moved. She studied abroad in Israel and lost a ton of weight, and they were like, what's wrong with her? And they figured out that she had celiac. She's got a twin brother, and her twin brother gets very sick. Like the two of them react to it very differently. It's very interesting.
That's interesting. Speaking of, or touching on celiac disease, do you know any of the non-genetic, causes? I know that we spoke a bit about them in the allergy epidemic, but because celiac is usually a genetic disease, I was wondering if you know some of the causes when nobody else in the family has it, just like Lisa mentioned with her story.
My guess is somebody had it. I don't know as if I've ever. I worked with, again, at Cornell, so the mom was an alum. Her son, she did not have celiac disease. Her son had celiac. Her daughter is who I met. So I met her when she was a freshman. Her son was a senior in college. So they, had a few years apart. The two of them both had celiac, and no family. And they're kind of scratching their heads, like, why, where did this come from? Sure enough, a couple of years later, her father got diagnosed with celiac disease at 76. So, again, it can be asymptomatic. It doesn't necessarily show up in the way that you would expect. And oftentimes there is somebody in the family that has it. And it's just not as direct as you would expect.
So would you recommend family members get tested?
I think, yes and no, especially I think it depends on if there are some questionable health issues that it's kind of like, I don't know why that's happening, right? So I'll give you an example. My sister, she went through a couple of years of trying to get pregnant, and she was living in Europe at the time, and she got pregnant. She had her first miscarriage. She got pregnant again, had her second miscarriage, and she started working with some natural healing doctors, fertility doctors, and they immediately took her off of gluten and dairy, and dairy seemed to not be the problem, but she's still off of gluten because it causes so many, she notices it causes so many problems. She's now has a little boy. It was able to manage her hormones. So it's gluten sensitivity. It's not celiac disease, but my point being, she didn't even know she was sensitive to it. Right now she notices. So I think, sometimes we associate a symptom with something else. And, no one would have said, oh yeah, you've had 2 miscarriages. Yeah, take out gluten. I mean, it's not as direct as you would expect. I didn't think of gluten when she was having challenges with her hormones. I mean, as a baby, she was very colicky. So you go back and start thinking, oh, she was like a very colicky baby, and then she had all these migraines as a kid, and then you start going, oh my goodness, maybe her body at that point was saying pretty consistently, something's wrong here. But again, most people didn't identify that. And we went to family chiropractor. The family chiropractor was like, oh, it's dairy, it's dairy, it's dairy. A lot of people say, oh, it's dairy, you're going to feel better. And she really never felt better. So she says that the elimination of gluten has caused a huge difference in her overall well-being. So, it's that's why it's squishy, because you don't expect it. It's not like food allergy is you eat this food, you become, here are the symptoms. Celiac, gluten sensitivity, they're a little bit more challenging because people react very differently. Hopefully that helps make it a little
No, it does.
a little muddier.
Yeah, great.
Any other questions?
I have another question, but I was going to wait to see if anybody else did because I didn't want to hog the floor.
Can we get back a little bit to the cause thing? I know you said that it's more diagnosed than it was before, but are there any other conjectures about what causes the sensitivities?
Well, I mean, I talked a lot about C-sections and
Yeah.
overall health of the microbiome.
So what do we do to treat the sensitivities? Like, as opposed to just elimination, are there treatments to change it?
Yeah, I don't know if you were here for when I talked about oral immunotherapy.
I thought that was for the allergies.
Yeah, we're talking about food allergies. So the diagnosed food allergies.
Yeah, no, I was asking about the sensitivities. Is there anything that you can do for the sensitivities?
I haven't really talked about food sensitivities today because I focused on the diagnosed food allergies specifically.
Yeah. Okay.
Any other questions?
Hey, Michelle, this is Annette. I think there's one more thing worth mentioning about celiac disease, just because I personally have an autoimmune condition, so I'm pretty aware that celiac disease is an autoimmune condition. Mm-hmm. And what's just mind-boggling is the fact that, you ingest or inhale, or, depending on how sensitive somebody is, gluten, and it causes your body to not just attack the antigen, it causes your body to attack itself, right? So as far as I understand, in celiac disease, as soon as gluten is ingested, the body attacks the villi and the intestine. Is there any other food that we know of or ingredient that causes like an autoimmune reaction when ingested, or is it gluten and specifically celiac disease that we know of up until now?
That's an awesome question, Annette. Thank you. And I specifically didn't cover the science behind it because I believe Dr. Levitsky goes into it. So I'm trying to cover things that are not in the course. But
oh, sorry, I didn't get that far yet.
Yeah. So no, he definitely covers celiac disease and gluten. And but you bring up an awesome point. No. Gluten seems to be that anomaly in terms of causing that level of a reaction. You saw the other proteins, right? So gluten being a protein, we all think about, I don't know if you guys have all made pizza dough or made bread, and the dough becomes really elasticy. I mean, that elastic quality is what is made from the gluten. And so the protein, gluten, or the proteins that cause the food allergies, I mean, it's essentially any of these foods that contain some kind of protein. However, none that are identified to have that kind of severe correlation, that have been identified. Like I said, a lot of people like to say that dairy can have a lot of cause a lot of problems, but not as direct as something like celiac disease.
Okay. Yeah, no, super interesting.
It's caused a lot of people to do insane amounts of research. There's research about the different types of gluten out there, right? So there is now research that is demonstrating that certain wheat that is made from or grown from more traditional seeds that haven't been modified may not cause as many reactions. So,
yeah, I've definitely heard that as well.
You've seen that, and there are some products out there. I know when I was at Cornell, they were pushing, we could start serving this, and I was like, yeah, I don't think so, because somebody says they have a gluten intolerant, we're not going to be like, well, it's kind of. You can't do a kind of, right? So until there's years and years of definitive studies on it, I think. But for the gluten sensitive, so here's a way to look at it from a food service standpoint. We've got somebody that comes and says, I can't eat gluten. They're at a sandwich shop, for example, right? I can't eat gluten. Okay, well, there are some people, to your point, that can't even use the same toaster. So it's like, you have to assume that they are the worst possible case and they can't have any contact. But people that are gluten sensitivity, they might be able to use the toaster, but people with celiac, especially severe celiac, might not be able to do that at all. So it can be really challenging when you yourself is avoiding gluten, and it's like, well, what can I have? Just avoid it all. And if eventually you want to try to start trying some of these other products, and I guess it's up to you as somebody that's can do it in a safe place. But some of these products kind of get me a little bit scared. There are pastas and breads out there that are like, we're safe gluten. We're made from safe wheat.
Are you able to share the studies at all that you mentioned that said that there were potentially some wheats that were safer?
I mean, those are I would encourage you to go to Google Scholar and look at them. I don't know if we're supposed to be sharing studies. I think those studies are supposed to be coming from Dr. Levitsky. Let me do a quick. Let me check.
Thank you.
If I can, because what I'll do is I'll send out the recording. So if they're comfortable with me sending out some studies, then I'm happy to.
Great. Thank you.
Any other questions? Start wrapping up.
I have another question, if we have a few more minutes. I thought it was really interesting how you had mentioned all of the factors regarding children under 2, and interesting information that is coming out, because I mean, as far as oral immunotherapy goes, I personally have a little kid at home who's 20 months old, and I had my own gut issues and all kinds of stuff, so I got really into this type of thing. And I really tried to expose her to as many allergens as possible before she turned like 12 months. But I just, was reading books by doctors who were running some of these, really new progressive studies. And do you think it's possible that a child that does then in the end develop an allergy can, I mean, you mentioned that people can technically grow out of childhood allergies, but not always. But do you think like oral immunotherapy has shown any potential success in being able to allow adults then to eat these foods again, even though that they've been dealing with this severe anaphylaxis since they were children?
It seems to be working better for kids that are a little bit older and teenagers and adults for that reason. I mean, you're talking about kids that are young and still developing, right? So why not give their body the natural possibility that they might outgrow it? Usually egg and dairy are the ones that are outgrown. Shellfish doesn't generally hit young kids, and oftentimes come at a little bit of a later age. But yeah, with oral immunotherapy, they have an age cutoff, and you would want to know that, yeah, this kid, can, I guess, really emotionally handle, because it's a pretty big emotional kind of undertaking, right? So so in general, they're looking at kids that are a little bit older that are willing to make that commitment.
Yeah,
I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, I mean, in terms of those that are really young, I mean, it's oftentimes associated. It comes on quick and pretty sudden, and can be pretty drastic for the first couple of years. And oftentimes, an egg allergy will often shift over into asthma.
Oh,
So there's
wow.
a huge correlation with egg allergy and asthma. So egg as an adult, you don't see as many egg allergies that you see. Peanut. Most people don't outgrow peanut. But I will tell you, I mean, my father was one. He had allergic reactions to bee stings, and he did oral immunotherapy for bee stings back in the 80s, and it was successful.
He just let himself be stung by bees multiple times. Unreal.
No, it was controlled.
Okay.
It was controlled. Yeah, and I don't know how they administered it, but I mean, I just remember because he was traveling an hour. It was almost an hour and a half to the hospital he was doing it at, and he was going down 3 days a week for at least a good 4 to 6 weeks. But he doesn't react to bee stings anymore. But I will tell you, as an adult, I mean, 3 years ago, he's 74. 3 years ago, so 71, he just added, he's allergic to shrimp now. 3 years ago, he added watermelon. So he's got a lot of oral food syndrome allergies. I mean, he's just added more allergies as he's gotten older. And, an allergist once described it to me as like, you've got, think of it as you've got a bucket, and your bucket, as it gets fuller and fuller over your adulthood in terms of environmental toxins and stressors and poor diet, the bucket gets so full, your body needs to release, right? So it releases either via allergy reaction, it releases via high blood pressure. I mean, that's why we want to try to keep healthy. I went to the dentist earlier today, and she was talking all about our gum health. I mean, every part of our body, if we can keep it, pretty healthy, you don't overflow that bucket, and it doesn't spill over.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Mm-hmm.
With children outgrowing allergies, how and why do some children outgrow them and others don't.
How and why? I mean, it's again, the body stops looking at that food as an antigen,
Okay.
right? So it starts kind of recognizing it as, oh, this is a food. So it's kind of working like a vaccine.
Just
So
because they've
yeah, so
had it more.
your body doesn't have that strong reaction anymore. And you know, I mean, for some reason, when kids are really young, something puts them into an inflammatory response, and that particular protein becomes very reactionary. And as they get older, they're either become more immune to it, and so they're able to manage that, or their body isn't in an inflammatory state as much.
Okay,
There's still a lot of what ifs when it comes to food allergies, and that's why I don't talk a lot about food sensitivities, because that's just, I mean, there's very little research on food sensitivities. So, well, hopefully that was useful and enlightening, and we've come to the end of our hour, but I will send out the recording, and feel free to follow up with your facilitator of the specific course you're in if you have any other further questions.
thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you for hosting.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Michelle. That was great.
Happy New Year to you all, and enjoy the rest of your course.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks. Happy New Year.
Okay, bye.